Oh, good.
All right, so I want to officially and formally welcome all of you to the end of program year webinar. Appreciate that you had a chance to take time out of your day to join us. Our goals today is twofold. We want to first go over all of the end of program year things to think about, timeline for the eData system and other data considerations, things to think about for this time of the year. And then after that, we'll take a break for some questions and go into a second part of the webinar where we will introduce the version 3 of the template changes to you and give you a little bit more information about that. So we're going to jump right into first what is new and what is consistent with past program years for ending the program year in eData. If you're new to eData, there's a lot of information here to absorb, but we're going to kind of give you a timeline first. If you've been in eData for a while, you'll notice a lot more is the same than is different. Not too many changes this year. So when we talk about timeline for eData, we're talking about data entry in the eData system. And we also have some corresponding other data items we want to include in this timeline. So when we end the program year on June 30th, here coming up at the end of the month, it is going to be possible to continue data entry in eData until July 15th. That is in part due to the 2 weeks that you have to enter data after it's happened. So you'll still be entering data and everything through that occurred in your program through June 30th, and you'll have until July 15th to get that into eData for the 25-26 program year. You can also note on this item, right as we turn the calendar to July 1st, there should be the 26-27 eData forms. So the intake forms, any other form you use for data collection for orientations, the plan is to have that available for you on the PAIR website, and that will be on July 1st. From the 1st to the 15th, of course, that's that final data entry. You won't enter data that you're gathering on the July 1st and beyond, but simply catching up with the data entry that occurred through June 30th. And then on July 15th, eData closes. And what that means is that data entry and data exporting will no longer be possible. We're going to break some of these things down in steps here for you, but that's the general overview of the timeline that we're looking at as we turn the calendar from June into July. We will be available, as we always are, for tech support for 25-26 for this program year until the end of the day, July 15th at 5 p.m. Of course, we would strongly suggest not waiting until the last minute to resolve issues if you find them. And we're going to go through some of the things for you to think about to check for issues between now and July 15th. But that's the official cutoff for available tech support for the 25-26 program year in eData. As we mentioned, the forms for the new program year with updates, and the updates are minimal. Those will be available on July 1st. There's no new NRS required fields for us to collect this year. We've removed more things than anything. We've added nothing new. Changed the descriptions and the barriers to employment, and we removed the area field in adult records and removed table 1112 and the CASAS reading assessments. So the changes are very minimal across the forms, but they will be dated for the new program year, and those will be the forms you'll need to use for all of your 26-27 data collection. On July 1st and July 8th, we will also be sending out data check reports, and we do this normally on that first Monday of the month. So the July 1st date really isn't anything unusual. We added July 8th as an additional data check as we approach the end of the program year, just to put in front of you and your advisors the ability to closely monitor. You can always run those data checks locally anytime you want in your own template, but we'll send those out on the 1st and the 8th as just friendly reminders that we're closing in on the finish line, and may have some items on those data checks to resolve before eData closes. And of course, as we get into July, one of the main deadlines coming up in the world of data is the data validation process. There's some comments that we have for that in terms of the functioning of the data validation reports in the template that we'll get to in the demonstration for that later. But for now, the process itself, if you want information on what that is, what it means, the deadlines, and what you need to do, you can see the division policy C-130 for details, and that's available on the Pennsylvania Department of Ed website under the Adult Ed section, Administrative Documents. So C-130 has your data validation process outlined. And of course, if you need any help with anything, but the data validation as well, if you need some support in getting the data together for that, please do feel free to reach out, but you'll need to follow the policy to be compliant. The eData end of program year, we have a little bit of a to-do list. Some of these items are suggestions. They might even be strong suggestions, but they're suggestions that were the result of observing data collection and data challenges in the past. As many of you know, eData, as we've talked about, has an annual cycle, and it's closed for most of the summer. So when you're operating your programs in June, but then of course July and August especially, you won't have access to the eData system for the 26-27 program year. That can cause some real challenges with data entry and data collection because the eData system is not available. You can't monitor things, you can't enter the data, and so on. So some of these suggestions are based on the limitations of not being able to access the eData system over the summer. And the idea for now, for the next just about 1 month, following these tips will help you prepare for that blackout, so to speak. To get to July 15th, we want to encourage you all to add any and all completed adult intakes into eData. Even if you never served the adult that completed and signed the intake, the concept here is that as for NRS federal reporting, those adults are considered reportable adults. There's a specific category for them, and they are required to be entered per the NRS guidelines. So if you have an intake for an adult, even if you didn't serve them this year, enter them in eData. Of course, resolving all near matches, and as most of you know, the near matches take 24 hours to resolve. So you'll need to call us, not on July 15th because there won't be time, but sometime, hopefully as soon as possible, to resolve any unresolved near matches or any that occur over the next few weeks. Also, if you have any adult record deletion requests, let us know. We also need to know the justification for the deletion because sometimes if an adult is reportable, as mentioned just a moment ago, they need to stay in eData. Only in cases of an error where someone was added to eData accidentally, then that would be something that we would just have to review that. So let us know that as soon as possible because those deletion requests do often need reviewed. And starting with that preparation for the data being unavailable to you this summer, we encourage you to save a copy of an export from eData in your C:\data subfolder. And any of you that run the template know that subfolder because that's where you have to put the data extract from eData in order to update your template. So we're suggesting taking that export and it would say it was extractall.zip. You want to just rename it something like 25-26 full year data, and it would be that zip file. And that's just so in the future you know that this is your backup in case you need to do something with a new template file. You'll have the data to put in that template down the road in July, in August, when you otherwise would not have access to it. So doing that now, and you could do it right now, and then maybe right before the system closes in July, do another export just to make sure it's the final one, everything's settled, you have all your data, and so on. Also, with that same idea in mind, we encourage you to save a copy of a version 3 populated template file. We suggest version 3 because that's usually, in most years, the final released version of the template, contains all updates, all bug fixes. So that means that you are combining the most recent version of the template with everything that you need and everything that's aligned with data at that time. You're combining that with the year-end export from eData. So that really gives you that end of year summary that you can refer to and not completely fly blind in that July, August timeframe. Also, you can save that in your C:\data subfolder. And you may want to put, you can always edit the name of the file, and you may want to append the name of the file with something like full year or something at the end. You could put that in all capitals. That way it really stands out, and you know that that template file is populated with the full year's worth of data. So that way, if you follow the previous slide's recommendation with the export file and the template file, you've got really a double backup to help you to make sure that you have the data you need over the summer while you're developing your PIPD plans, and you're continuing to look at assessments, which we'll get into that in a little bit. And a quick note to say that eData does close at the close of business on July 15th. So that means after that, no data entry, no data export. You won't be able to access eData after that time until it opens for you. And that's usually sometime late August, for most of you, sometime in September. And Kelly has a quick question in the chat related to that version 3. There will be a version 3. It's not yet released. We'll give you some details on that in a few moments. We are still on version 2, so you're absolutely correct, Kelly. That's where we're at right now. All right, so more end of year reminders. Just want to cover all these bases to make sure everything is all set and squared away for the end of the year. These are more tips and reminders. Do not exit all of your adults in eData. Only exit the adults who have an appropriate exit date. In the template on the hours page, there is an adults with 0 hours in the last X number of days. You can set the number of days as a variable in the little drop-down menu. If you run that and set it to 90 days, you can see which students have not attended your program within the past 90 days. If someone is on that list, it would be appropriate to add an exit date for them, because should they come back, they've been gone long enough that they would need a new period of participation anyways. So for many students that are still with your program, even if they may not, even if they're telling you right now they're not going to continue into next year, you would not necessarily want to add an exit date for them because they may change their mind and come back next year. So really what we're looking at for exit dates is those students that have completed programming and have left, or those students who have been gone for more than 90 days and you just don't, if you don't know what's going on, but they've been gone for that long, you can also give them an exit date as well. But do not just batch exit date everybody in your program. Also, a couple checks. Check and update your staff years of experience field. That is a field that is, it can carry over from year to year, but you want to update that years of experience. That's something that we report to the federal government, so it's something we want to have as up to date as possible. Also, check for the correct county in your adult records. And reviewing data checks. So we mentioned the email data checks that are going out, but you can locally run data checks anytime you'd like, using the data check summary report to start. And then if you any items you notice on that report, you can check on the data checking page, and you can drill down to the individual count. So if you see a count of 3 people missing a post test, you can run the subsequent named report on the data checking page to see who are those 3 people. And a little comment here that says solve errors versus document issues. If you find an error, fix it. It's pretty basic. If you find something that's missing, if you find something that's incorrect, take an action to fix it. However, some data checks do not point to errors. They point to things that are quirks or just reflection of the real world, which isn't always aligned and pretty. It can be messy. So some of those adults, if they're missing a post test, for example, if you forgot to or did not or somehow missed entering the post test, of course, enter it. If it is not available to enter post-test because they departed your program, say, with 20 instructional hours and they never met the hours and you don't know what happened to them. They just left without post-testing. That's, of course, not an issue that needs fixed. It's not an error. You can simply confirm and even document that these individual students left without post-testing and just make a note of it so that as you go through those data checks July 1st, July 8th, you don't have to recheck everybody. You can just glance at the list and see, okay, I've already checked those. I've documented this isn't an issue. This isn't an error. It's just something that they just left. It was just a reflection of what really happened. A couple more things just, and these are really getting into some really into the weeds for making sure the data is accurate. And the first item here is to check your class records for their contract and special program types. This also holds true, of course, for groups and pairs. And as you all know, the way that your students are tracked in certain contracts and assigned ultimately to contracts, especially for those of you that have more than one contract in-house, that may mean that you have 064 adult education and you have 061 IELCE. The way we know and the way the reporting statistician knows what project and what contract to count that person in for enrollment is directly by the contract number that's used in the classes that that adult attends. So we want to make sure that the contract numbers and the special program types are correct in those class records because that will dictate how things are shown to be distance learning, remote versus in person, and then additionally, what contract those hours are assigned to for each individual adult. So very important that those are accurate. Good time of year now to look back and make sure those were all done correctly. And then check and add when appropriate a reason for leaving for all of those adults that you do ultimately exit if you have that and if you collect that. That's another thing that's is used for reporting. So we want to have an accounting of that. And then any shared adults, what we mean here by resolving situations with shared adult records is, as many of you know, it gets very complicated if you share an adult with another agency and the testing in particular, and especially if you share the same assessments, if you both administer, say, CASAS or Best Plus, the conflict with forms and levels, that can come up with post-testing. So very important to if you have a shared student or a group of shared students to check in with the other shared agency, make sure they've completed their data entry, check to communicate that you've completed your data entry around items like assessments, which go into a shared pool with a shared adult record, so that you all have all of the records entered. And if there's a plan for post-testing between now and the end of the program year, there's some coordination around what form and levels should be used between the agencies. So just check in with each other with those shared adult records. And if you have any questions on how to navigate some of that, of course, let us know. But the key point would be is that you've checked in with that shared agency and have that information about really what is the situation. And then you can feel free to check in with us and we can give you some guidance and some things to think about once you have a little bit of a scenario to present. And I'm just going to kind of keep going through here, and I will pause for questions though at the end. One thing we mentioned a moment ago with the idea of saving and having an export and a template file populated for the 25-26 program you're going into next year is to help you plan for rollover adults and their assessment records. As you know, next year, you'll be able to roll over adults. And if they had assessments, you'll be able to roll those over too. So it's a really handy function. You don't have to recreate everything from scratch, but there are some limitations as to what is allowed to be rolled over. As far as adults, if they have attended your program in the past, you should be able to find them in your rollover search and rolled over their records. Once you have rolled them over, they should contain assessments, and there should be a function in eData for valid assessments that can be rolled over and used as a pretest for the current, what would be then the 26-27 program year. The trick, though, is there's an expiration date for assessments, and they only last for 150 days. So when you enter an adult record for a new program year as a rollover, you would add a period of participation start date for that person for that year. That date is what eData uses to evaluate the 150-day expiration. And generally speaking, most years it's around early February tests. Anything older than early February won't be able to be rolled over because it's too old. And anything newer than that, it depends on how far you are away from July 1st of that program year. So July 1st, go back 150 days. I didn't do the calculation, but it's probably somewhere in early February. Anything newer than that would be able to be rolled. But then when you go to a start date of August 1st, of course, you've moved that date up to August 1st. You're not going to go back as far. You're going to go back mostly to March. In order to help with that and account for all of the adults that may return to your program and who may have an eligible post-test, there are two queries in the template on the assessment page that show adults with and without eligible queries and the dates involved with their most recent assessment. That should give you a general sense for those students that return in July and August of who may need a pretest for that program year because they won't have a rollover assessment in the system. Now, of course, I have to say, it goes without saying, that making for you to make any and all decisions for pre and post testing, it must, of course, still be based on publisher recommended guidelines for hours and division post testing guidance. But with those things in mind, as you're trying to navigate who to assess in July and August, without the benefit of having the data from eData, you can use that populated template that we talked about in July and August to look for those adults that are returning to your program to see if they may need a pretest in lieu of in lieu of not being able to have a rollover assessment. All right. So hopefully that makes some sense. And if you want to kind of check in with about us that this about this with us, please feel free to do so because it can be a little confusing with dates. But I think if you just glance at those queries and look at the fields that are in there and see the expiration date for the assessment and begin to think about when would this student return to us, excuse me, in the summer. And if it's not until August, you'd see is that assessment that they have listed, the most recent one, going to be available in August. If not, they will need a pretest in the summer in order to have a valid pretest to count for enrollment in 26-27. So that's the general gist. So take a look at those queries when you get a chance. And if you have any questions around the queries themselves, let us know. Had one quick question here in the chat from Lauren, and thank you, Paula, for posting the date. That's helpful. I had a feeling somebody would take the challenge and do that. Are we still using 7/1/26 for rollovers? Generally speaking, yes. There is an idea when you roll over an adult, though, there's a specific label we could apply to rollovers that we call some continuing and some returning. If someone's continuing, a 7/1/26 start date would be appropriate. And continuing means that they have no more than a 90-day gap in instruction. So in other words, they never stopped attending. And so July 1 would be their start date because they're just continuing into the new year. Returning means that they've had a more than 90-day gap. So maybe they did attend in the spring, but then they don't start again in September. You would not use a July 1st date in those cases because they're effectively starting a new period of participation, which we're creating when we create their record in the new program year by using the start date of, if September, say, let's September 10th or whatever date is their date of first instruction. Those sort of distinctions are drawn clear in the appendix that's included in the system manual glossary. You can refer to that if you kind of want to anticipate what you'll need to be prepared for in the new year. We will update the system manual glossary. I'm kind of jumping ahead now to 26-27 business, but we'll update the manual glossary for 26-27. That just won't happen until sometime over the summer, but I don't anticipate major changes. So if you want to plan ahead and anticipate what you might need to start the year next year, feel free to look at that that's how you would handle your rollovers, and then also roll into that the necessary uh, assessment items that you have to think about. All right. And there was a lot of stuff, kind of just rapid fire, sent that all your way. For many of you, most of this is not new. But it happens once a year, so we always think that maybe these reminders are helpful in the sense that if you have done this before, it hasn't happened for about a year. Are there any questions that anybody has about the timeline, the recommendations for maintaining some data, the template file, and the template export, or any of the other tips or recommendations that we had? Most things, I probably should say most of what we talked about is either required by the division or strongly suggested. Of course, always check the division guidelines for details on requirements, but much of this is just gleaned from years of supporting folks and seeing what happens over the summer and giving you tips now to avert problems over the summer. See a couple questions here in the chat, so let's just kind of go through those here. Susan asks, is the query adults with eligible rollover assessment? I've run that several times and ours is blank. Um, if you get an unexpected result in a query like that, reach out to us and let us know. Could be something unique to your agency, could be um, a data issue, so to speak, or it could be the query itself. So let us know, Susan, reach out and let us know. We can look into that for you. Holly asks, for students who don't show up for pre-testing but did fail an intake, what start and end date would we use? Yeah, that's a great question, Holly. So normally we tell you for the past couple years, the date of first instruction has been the standard for the period of participation start date for all adults. Though again, with those continuing adults, you're going to use 7/1. For students who are truly reportable, who have no hours to add for instructional hours, if you don't have a date, which is what we say, use for the start date, then you can fall back on the date on the intake. It honestly doesn't really matter what date you use for reportable students. We just need a date because it's a required field. They didn't attend, they're going to go down as reportable. We don't track periods of participation for reportable students or anything like that. So I would suggest being consistent though, and use the date on the intake as your date, the start date for that adult. It might matter if you share that, ultimately share the adult with another agency, but if that happens, reach out to us and let us know. That's a situation best handled case by case. Joe says, what date will eData close? July 15th. Yep, Steve got you on that one. Lauren says, mine was also blank. So I wonder if something's going on with that. Yeah, we will check that. The good news is we haven't released version 3 yet. So if we find a bug, we can try to resolve that for you. So Steve, it sounds like IU5 and IU29 have, and
Yes.
IU29 have blanks. So we could dive into that maybe a little bit.
Sure.
Thank you.
Michael, it's Lauren.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the template now, and actually the one that I clicked that's coming up blank is the one at the top, the adults with eligible rollover assessment from previous program year with no current
Oh, yes. You'll want to use the
Yeah.
ones at the
at the
bottom, the
bottom.
with
Yes.
and
I just clicked
without.
on those and those ones are
Mhm.
good.
Yes, thank you for the clarification and jumping in
Yeah.
there. Yeah, it's confusing because the template has to be designed for the whole program year. And Steve, you had added a label. I think it says something like February to July or something to the one to
Yes.
two queries on the bottom. Those are the ones you're going to want to use now because those are the ones that we are targeting for the end of the program year. And a word of caution for now, if you run those now, bear in mind that there are two assessments that are going to be sunsetted as of June 30th. The table 1112 will not roll over into next year, and the CASAS reading 1 will not roll over. There is a CASAS reading 2 that will be valid, that'll roll over. We're going to remove those from those queries, but if you're running version 2, you'll still see those as eligible for rollover. So we're going to fix that, but just a kind of a word of caution. Most of you are already aware of those tests going away, but just know that that may show up on those queries. But yes, use the ones at the bottom on the assessment page. Holly says, what about exit date? And so we're going back to those reportable adults. What about exit date? The exit date, you can leave that blank for reportable adults. They never really started, so they won't have an exit. Janet says, when I run adults with eligible rollover, it's blank. Yeah, Janet, my suspicion is that probably ties back into what Lauren just mentioned. The report on the top. The report on the top will run at the beginning of the year. So you'd use that, say, in September, but you'll want to use the ones on the bottom. Diane asked, is the standard start date for continuing adults 7/1? Yes. Another question, Vinny says, will you be sending us a recording of this meeting? We won't send the recording out, but it is being recorded. And since it's being recorded, we'll post it on the PAIR website. Typically, we post it where the manual glossary page is under other additional resources. And Rosa, I apologize. I just noticed you had your hand up. Sorry to keep you waiting. What is your question?
Hi, Michael. Our students, a lot of them are going to take a break in July and they're continuing in September for our
Okay.
second session. Will that be 7/1 because they're
Uh,
continuing?
it depends on it depends on their most recent attendance date for this program year. Is this a batch of students that's all in the same class, and when is the final date for that class this year?
Sometime next week,
Okay.
s-
So let's say
at the end of
June,
this month, yeah.
yeah, let's say June 15th, just for math. So what I would suggest then, if we think, and the exact 90 days I'm abstracting here, but just to do some simple math out loud, July 15th would be 30 days, August 15th, 60, and then September 15th, 90. So if they come back within 90 days, they would be continuing. You would select 7/1 because the idea is they're still in the same period of participation. They never left. If they come back roughly after that 9/15 date, and we do of course say check the actual 90 days. There's a couple handy calculators you can look up on Google. Just say look up the date difference and say tell me 90 days from June 15th, and it'll give you exact for the year, because of course leap years, which we don't worry about for the summer, but still worth mentioning. So in this case, July 15th is the date that they last attended. We wouldn't be giving them an exit date because they're coming back next year, but you can still use that date for your calculation going into next year and say, okay, if they come back after September 15th, their date would actually be the date of first instruction after September 15th, because they are, by reporting purposes across program years, they're starting a new period of participation. So July 1st would not be appropriate. Rather, September would be a more accurate start date for those adults. And of course, note that that's going to dramatically impact the
The assessments.
availability of the rollover assessments. That's right.
Yes. And can that query that you have set up in eData in the template, can
Mhm.
that have an opportunity for us to insert a date so it calculates with a different date from 7/1, 7/2?
What are your thoughts on that
Maybe.
one, Steve?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, we can do variables. I've done them on other queries. So catch us after the meeting sometime.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, fortunately, we'll get into the timelines for the template here in a minute, but we're still in the testing of version 3. So there still might be a chance, depending on the complexity of the addition, for us to put some things into the template and put that in your hands. But if not, there's probably ways to sort and or filter the existing data in the data sheet to align with whatever date you have in mind. So if we don't have that filter, there's probably, or that suggestion that you had, Rosa, there might be another way that we could kind of support you in working through that and figuring it out.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Did I get to everyone's question? If I lost someone's question in the chat, I apologize. Feel free to re-ask it. I want to make sure we have everyone settled. The plan here would be after this section, after questions are kind of all resolved, we're going to go into a second section of template updates. But I want to make sure before we do that that all of you here get a chance to ask any questions that you have about the end of year items. And so I will stop talking for a moment and let you think of any questions, and then we'll move on.
I don't see anything in the chat that you missed,
Mhm.
so that's good.
And Michael, the students that are continuing September,
They would, if they're after that, so if we go back to that specific example, if they're after September 15th, they would be considered returning. So they're still rollovers, but they would be
yes.
what we call
Mhm.
returning, which continuing returning sounds like the same thing, but it is a distinction with a difference. And like I said, the best description is contained in that manual glossary appendix B, I believe it is, and it just goes into some examples of what to think about with that. Um, but yeah, those folks would be returning students, not continuing.
Yes, for the returning
Hmm.
in September,
Hmm.
if they let us know we're creating LOAs, is that correct? Can we use the same intake if they have an LOA, or do we have to create a new intake?
That is a good question. The reasons for a leave of absence don't typically include what you've described, which is a planned schedule. The leave
Mhm.
of absence is typically driven by the individual needs, like they have employment, medical, or other situations that they are dealing with in their world that cause them to be unable to attend class for a period of time that exceeds 90 days. So you use that leave of absence to bridge that gap and to prevent the need to create a new period of participation when they come back. It's kind of like they get excused,
Which is a
an
new
excused,
intake.
yeah,
A new
excused
period of
absence.
participation is a new intake.
If they did not have a leave of absence and they return and they do need then a new intake, yes, because they're starting a new period of participation. You can't use the old intake. You have to update the barriers to employment and all of those other details. Otherwise, with the continuing student, you can use the same intake, and you should use the same intake.
Yes. Um, but the returnings.
They're returning. That I would need to check with the division and
Okay.
get clarification with them and probably have some discussions about what meets the NRS definition for leave of absence. For now, since all of you are listening and I don't have an answer specifically, I would say limit the leave of absence to the reasons indicated in there. There is an other, so you could put other reasons, but it really should be student focused. It's a student reason. If it's the agency, if it's yourself and your class schedule that's causing the student to miss that much time, I'm not sure, to be honest with you right now, whether a leave of absence is appropriate, but I'll look into it.
No, no. These are student reasons. They are telling us I cannot attend the summer session, blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
I'm going away for,
Then yes, a leave of absence would be, if they have a reason that says they can't attend an existing session, that is absolutely appropriate for a leave of absence. And that's tricky to enter that in eData across program years, but what you would do is you can enter that now and indicate that because that will leave a little breadcrumb trail, so to speak, for the statistician that does the data reporting. She'll see that, she'll have it. And then when you start the year next year, you would just start the year next year normal. You wouldn't need to re-enter the leave of absence. You would just enter it normal. And because it's a leave of absence situation with the adult, you could use the previous intake.
thank you. That's good. Great. Okay,
Sorry, Rosa. I
gotcha.
didn't think I understood your
We
question
got
at
to it. We
first.
got to it.
Okay.
Yes.
Excellent. Excellent.
Okay.
Thanks for your patience on that one.
Yes, that's
Um,
fine.
and then Holly asks, question about no-shows. Do we just enter first demographic page or also agency goals and outcome set date? Really for a reportable, Holly, the key is the information you have on the intake on that adult detail screen. So if you think about the adult records in eData and that first tab, only one that's available when you add an adult, if you fill that in, save it, record goes through, that's sufficient for a reportable adult. It's totally up to you as an agency if you want to add goals and whatnot. The student's not going to be tracked for outcomes since they're reportable. But if you want to add goals, I would probably personally Well, what you're going to hear us say is if it happened and you have it documented, put it in eData. And that's just a best practice all around because eData should be a reflection it's just simply a reflection of what happened in the real world. And of course, we don't collect everything from the real world into eData, but that which is available to collect in eData should be put in eData if you have it. So I might actually just evolve my thought here on that right in front of you and say, actually, don't, it's up to you. I would say, yes, put it in if you have that information, because in eData should just by best practice match what you have in your local documentation. Very great. These are great questions. Appreciate the thoughtfulness of the questions and checking those queries and things. That's great. All right. Well, in the interest of time, I know we promised you we'd get you out of here by 1. We have some things we'd like to share with the template. If you are not a template user, you do not need to stay. That is all the information we have that is relevant for the end of the program, but you are all most welcome to stay for a review of version 3 of the template. So we're going to try to get through this before 1. And then at the end, I can stay after 1. So if anyone has questions we didn't get to and you still want to have some of those and that'll be part of the recording, we will stay later. So there will be some more time for questions here, but let's move on to the template items. And we're going to talk about template version 3 updates. Let me make sure. Yep, that was the first slide. Good. Template version 3, it's currently in test. So we are testing it, and a few of you here in attendance have been willing to do some beta testing for us, get in there and look at those queries, test things for us, and that is very much appreciated. Everyone benefits from that, so thank you all for doing some beta testing for us. Because we're in the testing, we don't have a specific release date yet, so stay tuned, but we do plan to get the template to you by the end of June at the absolute latest so that you do have time to follow up on all those recommendations. So we'll get it to you so you have at least a couple of weeks to work with it before the end of the program year in eData. What has changed in version 3? So you can continue to use version 2.1 or 2, whichever one you have, without issue. That still is a perfectly functional template. It's just missing the items that we're going to mention here that are important, but don't stop you from functioning day to day. These just clarify some things. So let's get into those details. Version 3, NRS reports page, table 4 and 4B. The NRS reports page will not look any different. And Steve's going to show you a demonstration of everything I'm going to describe here in a few moments. But what's different on NRS reports page is the table 4 and 4B, the formatting has changed, font is updated, spacing is realigned. There's a new total row for ABE and ESL sections. And maybe for many of you, the most important thing is table 4 in particular is updated to include HSC subtest measurable skill gains. And these are skill gains that adults have. The ones that are included in table 4 are HSC subtest MSGs where the adult does not have an MSG from an EFL gain on a subtest assessment subtest pair. So we're not double counting the adults, and those totals should be reflected in the percentages so you can calculate the different percentages at the various EFL levels that now include the HSE subtests. So that's on the table 4. Both the table 4 and 4B also, all of them now include under that EFL gain by post-testing column, they include gains that occurred in any subtest pair for the adult, not just the entry-exit pair. So you'll notice, if anything, moving from version 2 to version 3, not only those HSC subtests are counted in your table 4s, you no longer have to do that manually. You'll also see that the tables 4 and 4B will indicate gains in any subtest pair. So side by side, table 2, or excuse me, version 2 to version 3, some of your numbers, no promises, but if the data supports it, some of your numbers may go up. So just note that. Not many, but there are a handful of students that make gains outside that entry-exit pair. Also in version 3, and this is really kind of rinse and repeat here, but data validation also went through the same updates. So the table 4 and 4B on the data validation page include all of those items that I just mentioned, including the HSC subtest, MSGs, and that's just table 4. And then table 4 and 4B include the EFO gains from any subtest pair of assessments. The biggest difference you'll note on the data validation page, in addition to everything we've talked about, is that there is also an ability to now filter by your agency and or contract. Steve's going to demonstrate this, but in summary, you'll notice a drop down at the top of the screen. If you don't touch or interact with the drop down at all and click the buttons in the data validation reports, they'll run as you're used to. So if you have a process you used in past years to run these reports for the purpose of your data validation process, you can still use that as before. You wouldn't select anything up in the dropdown. If, however, you want to drill down and look at specific contracts and get data validation there, then you can use the filter at the top to view by contract. And so that might be useful. It's useful for those of us at the state level, because if we run statewide exports, we can run your individual reports. But if you're a main contractor and or a subcontractor that can export all of your data, thus multiple agencies in one template at a time, this now lets you filter by those items. And again, Steve's going to give you a demonstration, which will speak 1,000 words more than I can. Reminder too, the difference between the NRS table 4 and the data validation page is the NRS reports page, rather, that contains all students that have enrollment in any specific contract. If they're enrolled in multiple contracts, let's say 6.4 ABE and 6.1 IELCE, they will appear in both table 4s if enrolled in both on your NRS reports page. The difference is the data validation page uses the data validation layer to say, show only the adults where they have the most hours, starting with 054 family literacy. So if someone is enrolled in family literacy, regardless of their hours in any other contract, they will be included in the family literacy data validation table 4 and 4B. After that, if they don't have any enrollment in family literacy, they appear in the 3 remaining contracts where they have the most hours and are enrolled. So some of you that have 064 only, you don't need to worry about any of that, though I still recommend running those data validation reports for your process. Those of you that have multiple contracts, that's when that might kick in, because therefore then you don't duplicate adults. And if you run the data validation reports across all of your different contracts, your totals should equal your total enrollment with no duplication. So that's the difference, and that's why those are set aside differently, really mostly for use now, because we're nearing the end of the program year. Most of your adults are getting close to getting the final hours for the year. So running those data validation reports will let you see where they ended up being counted at the end of the year. And there's details buttons for each that let you see just that, let you see the who behind each EFL level to see who's included in those. And then lastly, the last slide here we have for the template new stuff is that just a couple of notes about performance reports. Those of you who run performance reports, you may have noticed that they do update automatically. That continues to be the case in the version 3 of the template. And those automatic updates mean that when you click the update button on the main page to import your new data, the build process also occurs for those performance reports. And you will notice that when you go to your performance reports and view them, you don't need to build them, just view them. You'll notice that the date that you updated the template is also the date that aligns with the build in your performance reports. And also Steve added a new function to prevent duplication of dates. So if you update the template multiple times in one day, you don't get a bunch of the same date appearing in your performance report. And lastly, just a reminder, this is just standard procedure now for the past few years. If you run performance reports and wish to continue using them in the new version of the template, you want to back them up in version 2 and restore them in version 3. But if there's any concern you have about that process and losing data or anything, I'll make 2 comments. First, give us a call. We'll walk you through it. No problem. Second is, as long as you keep a working version 2 with your performance reports and just save that as a backup, that can be a backup. And then you'll just need to make sure you get that into version 3. If you're used to that process, you're probably going to be good to go. You've done it before. If you're new to that process, don't hesitate to reach out. It can be a little confusing until you've done it a couple times. All right. Any other? So I'm going to actually pass it off based on time here without taking questions. I'm just going to hand it off to you, Steve. I'm going to start my share.
Great, thanks,
And you
Michael.
can take
We're gonna do
over.
a little demo of the template version 3. This is I loaded this with an agency that has a subcontractor just to keep things simple, and it's all been scrubbed. I wanted to just quick show you the assessments page where there were a few questions. People were trying to run this button up near the top. The third one down, adults with eligible rollover assessments. You want to go down to the bottom where it says reports February through July and run this button, adults with eligible rollover assessments, because of the time of the year. And that'll answer hopefully all your questions. And when if you ever have a question, you can always click on the name of the report and it'll tell you what that report does in words. So, but today we're going to look at the NRS reports. And you can see there's nothing different on this page, but as Michael was explaining behind the scenes, there's a lot going on. And I'll run these so you can see them. There's some new, it's a new look and feel on the page. We've got new fonts, larger fonts, some new headings. We've got column D is total adults with gain via post-testing, and E is a brand new one that replaced the previous column E. This is the adults with gain via HSE subtest. And then the column between C and D used to be an average hours, and now it's the summation of columns D and E. And then you have your percentage of adults with MSG, which uses that total adults with MSG. I added an ABE total subtotal line here in the middle, and then an ESL total line here with the grand total, which is the same on the very bottom. So it's got a little bit some new things. So take some time and look at it and triple check the numbers just to be sure that they're lining up with what you would expect. And if they're not, please let us know as quickly as you can. I'll show you the 4B. It has the same look and feel. It does not have the newer columns, except it does have this new ABE total, which is in place of the ABE level 6, which was all zeros anyway. And then the ESL total is also in here as well. So that's just a real quick look at those. And it's the same. Just keep in mind the same exact reports are run whether you go to the NRS reports page or the data validation page. And this is what Michael was talking about. We have a new look and feel on this page. Family literacy used to be all down on the bottom all by itself, but I incorporated it into the new select agency contract options at the top, which you do not have to use. You can just go straight to the buttons like you've done before. Now I've added a new column for family literacy. So if you wanted to see your 064 table 4, you just click it and there's the data validation. It says it in the title, data validation, and same thing for the 4B. That's the way that it has run longer than I've been doing this. So that hasn't changed. But the options now give you the option. In this case, we have a direct contractor and a subcontractor, and you can dial in for each of the contracts that are listed and get finer details. So like for the direct contractor alone, you could get a 4 And it has smaller numbers than, and you can get a 4B just for that direct contractor. So for those that have subs, this is a little handy feature. Another thing, you'll see it pops up. I don't know if you can see that. If you try to run a report that doesn't match the selected contract, it tells you. So I tried to run 054, but I have 064 selected. So that's just a little thing. And all the family literacy reports are in the first column here. That's why it's a little longer. We have details of enrolled families and school-age children, which if left blank, oh, here's a little quirk too. In order to blank out this column, this field at the top, you have to actually close it and then go back into it. That's just a little access quirk. Now that it's blank, I can run core outcomes, for example, and it'll do it for both. There it shows you. We have the direct contractor and then the subcontractor all in one report. If you wanted it with just one of them on the report, you would have to select that particular one and then run the report, and you would just get the one. So it gives you some flexibility for some different kind of reporting and things like that. And that is it for the show and tell. Any questions?
There is one in the chat, Steve. Would you mind pulling up one of the table fours? Any table four will do.
Any table for even 054?
Yep.
Sure.
So question from Allison. She asked, are the totals for E, column E, being pulled from the goals page? And yes, they are. So there are the core outcomes page or tab, if you will, for adult records has the four outcomes at the top and then a secondary outcomes at the bottom. That's just where it was designed. So under the secondary outcomes, most of you who are in eData know that under the secondary outcomes in that core outcomes tab in adult records, each of the available HSE subtests is listed. And it will say past reading, past math, past RLA, and so on. And so anything that you add that has a met date in those goals for any adult could be counted in column E if that adult has not made an EFL gain via post-testing. So that's a classic case where most agencies are, because it's always been a thing, used to entering assessments, and assessments are very controlled, if you will, and the gains are automatically calculated. So column D, the total adults with gain via post-testing, is what's always been. It's always been the gain, quote unquote, that you get on table fours. The new column, column E, is entirely dependent on your agency's practice of entering HSC subtest outcomes in that secondary outcome section of the adult record. So if you know that you've done that consistently and you have those met dates in there when an adult tells you I passed such and such test, or you saw that on the GED account, then you're likely going to have up-to-date records here. But if your agency has not done that or is in the process of figuring that out, then column E may be less reliable. So that's just a little bit of a reality check, because it's really nice to have here, but column E depends more on you as an agency to track those outcomes. They're unofficial. We've always said that when you do assessments, those are pretty close to the official numbers because of that control I mentioned. But when you have other outcomes like employment, post-secondary transition, and the HSC subtests, they should be documented in eData, but it's always going to be unofficial because those are verified, as many of you know, with external databases like Labor and Industry, Diploma Center, and so on. So, but this may be a good time as an agency, if you haven't yet already done so, to evaluate how you're tracking those post-tests, because now you will get the direct feedback in these table fours from adding them to eData. So long-winded way, Allison, of saying yes, those are the goals from the column E is from the goals page. All right, and I do see we're at 1 o'clock. I want to be sensitive to everybody's time, so I'm glad that we all got to meet. I will hang out here to answer any questions anybody else may have. So will Steve. That's all we have for you today, and we'll post this recording for you and for your colleagues on the PAIR website probably within the next week or so. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks,
All right,
Michael and Steve. Thanks so much.
You're welcome, Deb. Take care. Good seeing
You
you.
too. Mhm.
Thanks, Steve. That was a good demo. It was very helpful.
Oh, good.